he came in to office as Prime Minister and just started making these bold announcements, has ambitions to make some quite dramatic change.
And if the housing crisis was a medical emergency, the NHS would absolutely flip its lid and change stuff overnight.
Everybody just working together that a little bit easier could make a huge amount of difference in tackling some of the issues that we see children facing.
Hi, I'm Laura Nielsen and welcome to Hope in the Deep End. We've put together this podcast to inspire us all to keep working in areas of deprivation and poverty. We're sharing best practice, stories, outcomes and some interesting thoughts and ideas. So whether you're working in primary care, secondary care, the charity sector or any of the other myriad of roles, please listen and help us to keep each other inspired.
Hello and welcome to Hope in the Deep End podcast by the Shared Health Foundation. My name's Sam Pratt and I'm here with my colleague Isabel Kaner. And today we're going to be talking about the new political developments that's been happening in the UK. There's quite a lot that's been going on in the past few weeks.
I know, it's been a lot.
We kind of all went on various different bits of annual leave over the past couple of weeks and suddenly we've got a new mayor for Greater Manchester, a new Prime Minister, a whole new cabinet, various different ministers, and at time of recording we don't quite know who is doing what job where. But what's your thoughts on good old Andy Burnham now being Prime Minister?
I think I'm definitely happy that that's happened. I feel like we've all got a little bit more hope now. It felt maybe our previous Prime Minister Keir Starmer it was kind of stale by the end of it. Like, you know, people were expressing that they're not happy with the system, things aren't working, everybody's not doing as well as they'd hoped they would under a Labour government. You know, we all had hope during the election that things would change, and it just feels like it's been the same thing.
Now, do you think that's kind of like a comms thing? Because obviously Andy's new comms team are all very much the TikTok generation and he's kind of becoming more approachable. Do you think Keir was just quite boring and people didn't really like that?
I think he's quite robotic, isn't he? But
do we want that in a Prime Minister? We want someone that's quite stale and...
I feel like we tend to favour the more charismatic characters that you know come along and show us that they've got a bit of something about them. Keir, his social media tactics maybe weren't as strong as Andy's, but I think just generally Andy Burnham is a more hopeful person. Like, you know, his track record in Greater Manchester, he's changed a lot for the better. Manchester's doing amazing now because of it. That I think, you know, he came in to office as Prime Minister and just started making these bold announcements, has ambitions to make some quite dramatic change, you know. Coming in on your first day in your first speech and saying that you're going to end rough sleeping is quite
it's quite a bold
statement.
Say,
I mean, brave and ambitious, and we like that because Keir refused to set targets. So that's quite, you know, how can you have hope about a government being successful if they're not even going to create their own targets to meet? You can't really compare it, so... Yeah.
Now, anybody that knows the Shared Health Foundation, we are passionate around children and families living in temporary accommodation, and it's great to see Andy make the bold claim to end rough sleeping. But from what we know of him, what we've worked with him in Greater Manchester, that he has a really good nuanced knowledge of family homelessness and the impacts that homelessness has on children's health and their education and their life chances. So I personally would have liked to see him to go a little bit more bolder in terms of tackling homelessness as an issue. Yeah, we all know rough sleeping is a very complex issue that needs a lot of different partners to kind of to tackle that, to end it, to stop the re-traumatization and the cycle nature of homelessness as well. But as we know, there's so much evidence linking child homelessness to adult rough sleeping. To curb your long-term rough sleeping issue, you need to start with children. We haven't heard much about temporary accommodation. There was a little bit in his kind of like first pre-PM speeches around temporary accommodation, but I haven't heard anything since becoming PM. Like, what do you want Andy to say?
Yeah, I mean, you know, like maybe he thinks that ending rough sleeping is going to be easier than ending temporary accommodation because temporary accommodation is a solution to ending rough sleeping, maybe, if you provide the right support for people. It doesn't always work out that way, but, you know, it can be. That maybe that's a smaller feat than committing to reducing child homelessness by 50% or whatever. He's also not set a time frame of when he's going to end rough sleeping, so that in itself maybe is something that we should be a little bit, I don't know, concerned that he's not setting that time frame in that. But I think, you know, what's important is that under Keir Starmer, the government were actually doing some really great work around temporary accommodation. So the National Plan to End Homelessness had so much in it about children in temporary accommodation. And, a lot of our asks were in that, and that was absolutely amazing. We're still waiting to see the implementation of that. But at the same time, it felt hopeful that the government were listening, that, children in temporary accommodation are an important part of reducing your future rough sleeping targets and everything.
Yeah, there was such great kind of momentum under Keir's leadership, and specifically Ali McGovern, who was the homelessness minister at the time. Now she's moved on to health, and we, at the time of recording, might have Florence Eshalami as homelessness
She seems like the
minister.
most likely one.
Most likely, haven't confirmed yet. Being chair of the select committee. We've worked with her previously on other bits of pieces. Our CEO Laura has been to the give oral evidence at the select committee, has been grilled by Florence a couple of times. So she seems like the best person in the job to do that. So hopefully there'll be even more momentum moving forward, especially that she wrote a lot of reports that had a lot of great recommendations in it.
Yeah,
now she's in the job to get it done.
She's quite damning in those reports, though. I wonder if she's going to tone it down slightly.
Who knows? Obviously, you get into government, things are slightly a bit different once you're having to toe the party line, no matter what party you're part of. But I am quite hopeful to see what the next stage is. Yeah, but we've had really great engagement with former ministers and civil servants to kind of get the national plan to end homelessness to this point, and the child poverty strategy as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we need to focus on children.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Coming up is the duty to notify is going into law. It's being implemented from September.
Yeah.
So that's an opportunity for us to keep pushing with this new government about don't forget about children in temporary accommodation, because they are important.
It's not going to build any houses, but what we're talking about is the support and how to stop the re-traumatisation of homelessness, and how do we best look after people once they're in the system. So
and breaking the cycle of it as well.
Yeah, breaking the cycle of it. The duty to notify is about ensuring that the right professional partners, specifically schools and GPs and health visitors, know about a child's whereabouts and their housing situation. When we're looking at the wider social determinants of health, there's so much that impacts a child's outcomes: poverty and deprivation and homelessness and trauma and racism and adverse childhood experiences are all kind of compounding into children's futures. And we use the term failure to thrive in the work that we're doing, that there's so many different aspects of a child's life that kind of stops them flourishing to be the great people that they want to be. So yes, we shall see over the coming months, see what government kind of announces. Hopefully we can still be part of those conversations as well. But there's loads of other extra bits as well. Obviously, we can all have the long debate about LHA rates till the cows come home. The government needs to put some money behind how we actually fund temporary accommodation. How do we stop councils going into bankruptcy because of the cost of their TA? But along the journey of that, we've got to talk about safeguarding. We've got to talk about mixed accommodation. Can we stop putting vulnerable single adults and vulnerable families in the same temporary accommodation? Whilst we're in the bid to end the use of B&Bs and the end the use of inappropriate temporary accommodation, today there are children having to share kitchens and bathrooms with vulnerable single adults who are not safe. But we need to see some national leadership on that. What do you know about the the other aspects around what impacts a child's development and temporary accommodation? What's been missed from this government's strategy so far?
Good question. I mean, so the main one probably there is safeguarding. As you say, it's hugely problematic. Previously the government has justified it by saying in some circumstances it's okay. Fine, if it's appropriately risk assessed and the precautions are taken to make sure that everybody is protected where they're in. But that should be an exception to a blanket ban rather than a justification for a situation that shouldn't be allowed to happen. We say it should be a never event to mix families and singles in accommodation. So I'd like to see that from this, a commitment to at least reducing it where we can. I know if the good work around reducing the use of B&Bs, particularly the unlawful use of B&Bs, is to continue. A, that needs to include council-owned B&Bs, and B, that needs to take into account that we need to do that quicker because families are being placed inappropriately.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the risk of that, it's obviously it's not just the safeguarding risk, but the mortality risk for under ones. you're 3 times more likely to die as a baby in temporary accommodation as you are compared to your housed peers. And we know that from the evidence by the National Child Mortality Database, and then new data that's come out from Embrace UK around stillbirths and neonatal deaths in temporary accommodation. You know, those deaths are happening now, and we can't wait 10 years for various governments to build houses. They didn't necessarily
need to happen, those deaths. Like, they're not inevitable.
No, yeah,
for children.
Totally preventable. Lots of them were in B&B, so there is a really good focus to make sure families aren't in there. But there's so much that, you know, midwives, obstetricians, gynecologists, doctors, GPs, nurses, secondary care, like, it's so wide and complex. Like, there's lots of things that they can do in terms of making sure we know what these children are, making sure that the discharges are healthy and safe, that we know that every kid under 2 has a cot. You know, it's in guidance, but it's not in law yet.
Which is crazy, to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm going to say.
It's crazy.
Because, you know, we wouldn't expect an adult to go into a hotel and sleep on the floor. Like, you just wouldn't. So why would you not provide a bed for a child?
Yeah, when the risk...
They're at the most vulnerable.
Most vulnerable.
And, you know, we're not taking precautions to make sure that they're protected.
Yeah. And sudden infant death syndrome, you know, can happen to anyone in the best of circumstances, but you underline homelessness and poverty and deprivation, or families that aren't white, or families that are coming through the asylum system, or coming through lots of other complexities. You know, multiple moves, cold houses, hot houses, properties that are too hot for families as well. All adds to the vulnerability of these babies. But there's lots of like really sensible things to do. They don't really cost much, like the things that we've just said. Taken to the standards of the accommodation as well. You know.
Well, yeah, so we've got the decent home standard that's being applied to temporary accommodation, but this 2035 was the implementation date. So the government's recommended that landlords start adhering to it, but there's no incentivisation to do that except to be a good landlord. So, you know, how they are going to enforce that as well is another thing. You know, do they introduce inspection services? So there's the example of setting the standard in London, who are an outside body who go in and like rate accommodation from like a graded system, and then from that they can then advise local authorities on which properties and which temporary accommodation providers they should use when housing families, and then they can, you know, cross-reference that and check who would be most appropriate to place in those different properties. Something like that could be hugely beneficial. That, you know, if it's an outside organisation, might cost the government a bit of money, but then also it's going the human cost of that is going to obviously be vastly improved. We're not going to be hopefully having as many children die when they don't need to in inappropriate accommodation. Yeah, and, you know, life chances being destroyed when they didn't need to be. Yeah, and this is state-funded, taxpayer-funded accommodation. Exactly. So you would never expect that from a different service where you're paying a huge amount of money and then really not getting anything back from it at all. It's expensive, and in often a lot of cases it's really poor accommodation as well. So it's bad and really expensive. So yes, you'd never get that in the private sector. Well, quite a lot of temporary accommodation is in the private sector, which is another thing. But outside of that, I mean, you know, the housing crisis in itself is one example of that. You know, private rented sector for just renters is obviously not great either. Yeah. But, you know, you wouldn't, I don't know, buy a car that was falling apart and then be happy to pay full price for it and then not do anything about it. Yeah. And if the housing crisis was a medical emergency, the NHS would absolutely flip its lid and change stuff overnight. Yeah. You know, there's been cases where we've had tens of children die of measles in a certain period of time, which is horrific, and the NHS has changed its policies and procedures overnight to make sure those deaths don't happen. But we've had over 100 deaths in 6 years where temporary accommodation has been a contributing factor to these children's deaths, and almost kind of radio silence tumbleweeds on lots of things. There has been a lot of really great policy changes, and the conversation is happening across NHS, ICBs, housing authorities, national government and local government, but I wouldn't say it's moving as quickly as I would like to, because these children are in inappropriate accommodation in inappropriate settings. That would be another thing that maybe we should be asking for from this new government is, you know, greater cross-departmental working. I know we had the cross-departmental working group who were working on the homelessness strategy with the previous government, but
And there is the duty to collaborate in the new
but I think
strategy.
Going forwards with different policies, there should be that anyways. Like, it shouldn't be so siloed, even outside of government, local authorities, getting different departments to talk to each other in the same building, on the same corridor. Sometimes it doesn't always happen, and it can be quite frustrating when you're trying to coordinate a joint up response to something that will make a difference to children's lives and their outcomes, and actually might make the work of local authorities a lot easier. But it's people working in silo. It's really, really difficult to get things through sometimes. So fostering that better working relationship, even with local authorities, government, third sector organisations, everybody just working together, that a little bit easier, could make a huge amount of difference in tackling some of the issues that we see children facing when they're homeless.
So new PM, new cabinet, Angela Rayner's back in the hot seat.
She's back.
Secretary of State of Housing. What do we think of the new leadership structure now? Obviously, we've said what we think about Andy. What about having Angela back?
I mean, I do agree that we definitely need to have a Secretary of State that knows what it means to live in a social house and understands the importance of it and how it makes such a difference to your life. Obviously she had her shortcomings with her tax issues. I personally think that she does do a good job in the job of Secretary of State for housing and local government. Whatever happens now, we don't know. She's not outlined any plans.
No, we haven't had any announcements yet, so maybe there's something that will come over in the summer.
We'll have to revisit this conversation.
Yes, leading up to new parliamentary season, because Andy's not been PM whilst Parliament's been sitting yet, so there's been no kind of official government announcements that way. So I guess it's kind of a watch this space really ahead of the party conferences. I'm sure there'll be lots of announcements coming up to that. We as Shared Health are going to 5 of the main party conferences: Reform, Conservative, Lib Dem, Green and Labour. Wide political spectrum. Any thoughts, feelings, apprehensions, worries? What's your vibe leading up to it?
I hope the Labour one is going to be a bit more upbeat again. Last year, everyone kind of seemed a bit defeated at the conference. Obviously, the year before that, they'd just won the election and vibes were high and everyone was celebrating, and it felt like a really fun place to be. There was so many people to go and chat to, whereas last year felt like the complete opposite. It was really quiet, quite bleak, really. Yeah,
very bleak. Considering there was about 50 fringe events that were all about housing as well. The mood was quite low. So I don't want this PM to be a gimmick PM or just doing social media stuff and everyone's obsessing around number 10 North now, which I think would be great for the region. It's good to kind of move focus outside of Westminster, but we want to get on with the job now. Do some cold solid policies and start delivering. It's really interesting kind of going to the other party conferences as well, because they all have a very distinct vibe. We've not been to the Greens or Reform party conferences before, but we're working with the Creators Group, who are a public affairs agency who specialise in the built environment and know local government inside and out. They're the kind of the experts on local government, and they've put together the 165k campaign, which is 165,000 reasons. 165,000 reasons why people should act, because when they first thought of the campaign about a year ago, that's how many kids that we had in temporary accommodation at the time. Now we're up to 176,000 and climbing. The problem's not going away, but their campaign is an umbrella campaign to bring together housing associations, house builders, local authorities, people with lived experience, charities, politicians, everyone to work towards ending child homelessness, reducing B&Bs, and to support families and children through that. So we're working with them to do a fringe event at every party conference, which would just be interesting to see how it lands at each one, because politics aside, we all want better for our communities. We all want better for our people that we love and the areas that we love. How that is displayed in the different conferences will be quite fascinating. We've always had a really good reception at the Lib Dem conference. Done lots of work with the spokespeople, who, even though they've kind of chopped and changed over the years, we've always had really good engagement with them. Similar with the Greens as well. So and the Conservatives recently, with Canterbury Council that put in a full council motion on behalf of the work that we've done around declaring a temporary accommodation crisis for children. So, one of our main asks over party conference season is that each council declares a temporary accommodation crisis as part of their full council motions, because temporary accommodation is a cross-party, cross-area, cross-geographical. It affects everybody.
Homelessness doesn't care what political flavour you are.
No. And the kids don't care.
Yeah.
The kids just want a home. And if they get put in a poor B&B or poor accommodation with no support, or out of area far away from their original home or place of residence, whether it's city region or rural areas, it affects every department, every area, and it's all our problems. So yeah, I'm kind of hopeful to seeing how it lands.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think it's quite an uncontroversial topic, supporting children who are experiencing detrimental life outcomes.
Yeah.
That nobody disagrees with what we're saying. It's more getting them to act on it now.
Yeah.
Is the next part, especially with the 165,000 Reasons campaign. We've got so many supporters on that now, which is amazing. But it's now, what do we do with that support? And we need to, move that into real change.
Yeah, it's about implementation now. Yeah, we've got a lot of research. We've got a lot of really successful campaigns that have happened, through the work that us and Just Life will be doing through the APPG for temporary accommodation. We couldn't have done all the success campaigns without the leadership of Siobhan McDonough, and being a proper cross-party consensus. We've had MPs from all parties being involved in that, which is, how politics should work, regardless of kind of what side of the house you sit on and what colour your rosette is, this is an issue that affects everyone. So it's great to know that all parties are really engaged in it. Yeah. It's just about getting stuff done now.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've kind of had enough of talking. It's time for
There's
action.
only so many times we can repeat the issues. It's, now it's the time for change.
Yeah. So if you're at a party conference coming up over autumn, or if you're involved in local government, or if you're just really interested and wanting to know more about temporary accommodation and how that affects children's outcomes and life chances, then get in touch with us at the Shared Health Foundation. We'd love to speak to you. Share this podcast with your colleagues, with your friends, and we'll speak to you very soon. Thank you.